It's a visual blight, Mr. Whitmore. Your structure isn't compatible with the community aesthetic. That's what Cassandra Bellamy said the first time she stepped onto my land without so much as a knock. She stood there in her crisp blazer and designer sunglasses, talking about my grandfather's cabin like it was an oil stain on her precious view. The absurd part? This cabin's been standing since 1963, long before there were even paved roads out here, let alone HOAs and neighborhood charters. My name's Caleb Whitmore, and before this story is over, you'll see exactly how the people who tried to bulldoze my history ended up begging me to spare theirs. But before we get too far, tell me where you're watching this from in the comments, and if you've ever dealt with one of those HOA types who think the whole world's their checklist, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to hear how this one ends. My grandfather built this cabin with his bare hands. It was never meant to be glamorous. It was meant to last, a place to breathe after the war, where the only rules were made by weather and will. My father kept it going, and after he passed, after we lost him suddenly to a stroke, I came back with my son Eli to keep the legacy alive. There's something sacred about fixing the same screen doors your dad once slammed, about watching your son learn to bait a hook where your grandfather used to kneel. It isn't just a structure, it's a memory, standing. I knew I was moving into a neighborhood that had changed. I didn't expect to be hunted for it. The first sign came in the form of a folded letter taped to the front gate. Not mailed, taped. Rain had smudged the ink, but the message was loud and clear. Structure non-compliant with community standards must be removed or brought into alignment with Regulation 4.6b within 30 days. It wasn't signed, just a typed name at the bottom, Cassandra Bellamy, HOA president. I didn't bother to frame it or scream about it online. I used it to wedge a wobbly table leg. Then she showed up in person. I was splitting firewood when I spotted her poking around with a tape measure, heels sinking in the soft dirt like she was staking claim to Mars. I leaned on the axe handle and waited until she saw me. "You're trespassing," I said. "This land is under review," she replied, eyes flicking from her clipboard to the chimney. "And if you have nothing to hide, you won't mind a little compliance." I minded a lot. See, most people in this neighborhood just fold. They repaint, they remove, they pretend to smile. I didn't. I started recording every visit, every warning, every misplaced threat. That day became file number 1 in a folder I'd soon need far more than I realized. 3 more notices came in over the next week. One claimed the siding was an unapproved color. Another targeted the dock my grandfather installed, said it extended into shared water space. And then, the most insulting one of all, improper yard ornamentation. She was talking about the carved wooden fisherman by the tree, the one my grandfather made after he lost use of his left hand. They weren't trying to enforce rules. They were trying to bury what didn't fit their brochure. I asked around. Cassandra's done this before. Forced out a retired couple over the color of their shingles, drove a widowed vet to sell because his pickup obstructed visibility. But the thing about me is, I don't scare easily. And I don't sell family. Not for paint colors. Not for control. That's when Judy stepped in. Sweet old Judy Freeman, my neighbor to the east. She brought over some raspberry preserves and the truth. "They made me tear down my greenhouse," she said, shaking her head. "Said it wasn't symmetrical with the neighboring lots. My herald fought them. Then pages went missing from our permit file, and the next month we were hit with a retroactive fine." Her hands trembled when she poured the tea. "Don't let them do this to you." I didn't plan to. I planned to understand every inch of this battle, so I went to the county records office, asked for parcel maps, old zoning documents, boundary lines, took them home and stayed up past midnight comparing scans to surveys. That's when I saw it. The gap. A clean legal break. My cabin was outside the HOA's charter line, just barely, but undeniably. I didn't say a word. Because Cassandra hadn't just stepped over a line, she'd stepped onto land she had no claim to. And soon, she'd learn. When you threaten something a man has buried his father under, you'd better be standing on solid ground. They didn't come with chains or bulldozers, not yet. That's not how people like Cassandra Bellamy operate. They wear you down, slowly, strategically. They let the fine print do the choking. The morning after I confirmed the cabin sat outside their authority, I thought maybe they'd back off. Maybe someone in their inner circle would realize they'd overstepped. But I underestimated just how obsessed Cassandra was with control, and just how deep the HOA's claws had sunk into this place. The first fine came disguised as a courtesy reminder. It was printed in full color, delivered in an envelope fancier than most wedding invitations. Violation 1, unauthorized exterior modifications. Apparently painting the porch railing, just sanding and restaining it, mind you, constituted an offense. They claimed it altered the historical harmony of the visual zone. Whatever that meant, my porch railing was 30 years older than their so-called visual zone. I shook my head, filed it in the folder, and didn't respond. A day later, another envelope arrived. Violation 2, non-compliant water feature. This one made me laugh. They'd taken issue with my stone bird bath, the one Eli and I built together last summer. They said it encouraged mosquito breeding and disrupted native bird patterns. It didn't. It had a small fountain and a water filter. I could have sent a rebuttal, but that's what they wanted, a back and forth. Engagement meant they still held the leash, so I didn't bite. Violation 3 arrived in person. Eli and I were stacking firewood when a man in khakis and aviators stepped out of a golf cart with a clipboard. "Afternoon," he said flatly. "Mark Dyer, HOA enforcement. I'm going to need to measure your dock extension." I didn't move. "You're standing on private property. This is your only warning." He held up a laminated badge like that meant anything to me. "We've had multiple complaints about your structure obstructing community water access. There's no community dock here. Still, sir, we need to ensure compliance. You don't want to escalate things." Eli turned his phone sideways and started recording. "Go ahead," I said. "Make sure you get his badge in the frame." Dyer paused, then walked back to his cart like he was late for lunch. That night, Eli asked if we were in trouble. He's only 14, but he's sharper than most men I know. "No," I said. "They're in trouble. They just don't know it yet." By the end of the week, I had 6 separate notices posted to the front gate, each with escalating fines. They were getting bold now, tacking papers to trees, leaving voicemail warnings, emailing me like I'd subscribed to their harassment newsletter. Judy came by with pie. She shook her head as she saw the cluster of envelopes fluttering in the breeze. "They did this to us too," she said quietly. "They drain you, not with bulldozers, but with paperwork. My Herald used to call it death by paper cuts." I nodded. "Let's see how well they bleed." The next day, I submitted an official records request to the county office, not to the HOA. I wanted every foundational permit, construction variance, and deed reference tied to the community center, their precious $7 million 0 cents clubhouse. I didn't say why. Let them wonder. That afternoon, Cassandra sent me a handwritten note, delivered via courier. It read like a breakup letter written by a dictator. "Mr. Whitmore, we understand your resistance stems from emotional attachment. The HOA is willing to offer relocation assistance to help ease this transition. We believe mutual understanding is the key to a harmonious neighborhood." No signature, no return address, just the printed HOA crest at the top. I folded it carefully, slipped it into the folder, and underlined one line in red: relocation assistance. That night, I sat on the porch and watched the wind ripple through the pine needles. Eli was inside editing the video footage from Dyer's visit. "They really think they can push us out," he said, handing me his phone to watch the clip. "Why do they care so much about this place?" I looked out at the old dock, the faded paint, the oak tree my father carved our names into. "Because we don't fit their frame, and some people hate what they can't control." Eli nodded, his jaw tight like mine had been at his age. "So what do we do next?" I smiled. "We stop reacting, and we start preparing." Because Cassandra thought she was building pressure. She had no idea I was just laying foundation. I told Eli we were done reacting, and I meant it. But the thing about preparing for a storm is you have to know how deep the roots run before you cut the tree down. And in this neighborhood, roots meant history, paper trails, patterns. So while the HOA kept playing offense, I went looking for people who knew their tricks and remembered them. I started with Judy. She'd lived here longer than most of the houses had existed. Her porch still had the original paint, chipped but proud like it refused to fade quietly. When I knocked, she was already at the door with 2 glasses of sweet tea like she'd been expecting me. They'll never stop once they start, she said, motioning me toward the porch swing, but they do slow down when they realize someone's keeping notes. Judy had boxes, literal cardboard boxes stacked in her pantry, filled with letters, violation notices, meeting minutes, and newsletters dating back 15 years. She called it her resistance library. I spent 3 hours sorting through them that afternoon. You ever notice a pattern? I asked, flipping through a file labeled Pratt L. Siding Dispute. Judy tapped her temple. They rotate targets one at a time long enough to wear them down, then move on to the next. Keeps everyone too tired to fight together. Leonard Pratt. He'd been cited for everything from decorative shutters not matching window dimensions to vegetation obstruction. After a 6-month battle, he sold his home and left. That pattern showed up again with another name, then another. They always win, she said quietly, until someone connects the dots. I took photos of every document, scanned them when I got home, and built out a timeline. Each name, each fine, each silent retreat from homeowners who didn't want to fight anymore. Except now they had someone who did. The next morning, I knocked on a door 3 streets down. It belonged to Marla Reyes, the county clerk. I'd met her once before, briefly, when filing for a zoning map. She had a memory like steel wool and a stare that could quiet a room. You came to me twice in 2 weeks, she said, not looking up from her monitor. That doesn't happen unless someone's got a land dispute or a vendetta. You're here for both, aren't you? I just need the foundational permits for the clubhouse, I replied. She tilted her head. And I'd like to know who signed off on the location back when it was built. Marla leaned back. You know what's funny? That file's been requested before, but never by a homeowner. She didn't say who. I didn't ask. 30 minutes later, she slid a folder across the counter. Inside, an original site plan, a land usage request, and a surveyor's note about a pending easement overlap, dated 20 years ago. I blinked. They knew? Marla nodded. They built it anyway. Back at the cabin, I pulled out the surveyor map and overlaid it with my family's deed. The clubhouse's eastern patio, roughly 12 feet of it, sat directly over the edge of my grandfather's original parcel. 12 feet? That was all I needed. I didn't call Cassandra, I didn't gloat, I didn't send a letter. Instead, I went back to Judy's porch with a thumb drive and a cup of coffee. I want to do more than fight, I told her. I want to document what they've done, to all of us. Start gathering names, people who walked away, people who paid fines just to avoid conflict. This isn't just about me anymore. Judy didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached under her porch chair, pulled out a faded scrapbook, and handed it to me. Start here. Inside were photographs, homes before and after the HOA's adjustments. Smiles that faded over time. Driveways that once had swings now empty. Quiet little sacrifices no one ever noticed. Until now. Later that night, Eli watched me pin red markers on a digital map of the subdivision. What are you doing? He asked. Drawing a line, I said, and making sure everyone knows exactly where it ends. Because this wasn't just about protecting my home anymore. It was about reminding them who the land really belonged to. And if you've ever watched a quiet neighborhood get swallowed by control freaks with clipboards, drop a comment below, because sometimes all it takes is one person saying no more to remind them that power doesn't come from paper, it comes from people who remember. The scrapbook Judy gave me stayed on my kitchen table like a quiet reminder. Every time I passed it, I saw another chipped fence, another adjustment, another forced silence that looked like compliance. It wasn't just history, it was strategy. A slow purge of everything that didn't match Cassandra Bellamy's curated catalog of acceptable living. By the following weekend, the air had shifted. Subtle, but there. People I'd never spoken to before gave me cautious nods when I walked by. A man 2 blocks down left an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. Inside, copies of his old violation letters and a post-it that read, "She fined me for putting up a flag. Good luck." The next HOA meeting was open to homeowners as they always claimed it was, but this time I showed up early, not to speak, not to fight, just to sit. The clubhouse smelled like overbrewed coffee and overconfidence. A wall of smiling portraits of board members greeted you as you walked in, Cassandra's front and center. You could almost hear the echo of their own applause. I sat near the back, notepad in hand, calm as ever. Cassandra stood at the podium, surrounded by the rest of her crew, Leonard Pratt, Teresa Vaughn, and Mark Dyer. They were running through the usual agenda: budget approvals, landscaping quotes, repainting sidewalks. For uniformity. And then she paused. "We'd like to address a recent uptick in resistance," she said, voice like syrup poured over broken glass. "There are individuals circulating misinformation about our association's legal boundaries. Let me be clear. Our charter grants us enforcement across all properties within the Harmony Pines development zone." My hand went up, slowly, deliberately. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore," she said with the kind of smile people use right before they draw blood. "Can you define the Harmony Pines development zone," I asked casually, "and confirm the date your charter was filed with the county?" There was a shift in the room, slight but noticeable. Cassandra blinked. "The documents are available through standard records. If you have a concern, you're welcome to file." "I already did. Turns out my grandfather's parcel was never annexed." "That line you're claiming, it stops 12 feet short of your eastern patio." Leonard looked sideways at her. Teresa frowned. Cassandra's smile didn't break, but her hand tightened on the podium edge. "That's a matter still under review," she said sharply. "I've got the deed, the maps, and a county clerk willing to testify," I replied. "You built on land that was never yours, so maybe it's your foundation that needs review." There was a pause, not silence, just that thin space where everyone holds their breath, waiting to see which way the room will tilt. Then someone near the front, an older man I didn't recognize, chuckled under his breath, a short, tired laugh, like someone who'd just watched a door creak open after years of it being stuck shut. Cassandra moved on quickly, but the room had already shifted. After the meeting, as people trickled out, Leonard caught up with me near the coffee table. "She didn't tell us about the land issue," he muttered. "If this comes back on us." "It won't," I said, "as long as you start stepping back." "I'm just the treasurer." "Then you'd better start counting, 'cause things are about to get very expensive." He left without another word. I didn't see Cassandra again that night, but a day later she showed up at the edge of my property in heels and a perfectly ironed blazer. No clipboard this time, just her arms crossed and a practiced look of neutrality. "You think this will end well for you?" she asked, voice low. "I don't think," I said, stepping out onto the porch. "I read deeds." She glanced toward the cabin like it offended her existence. "That shack is bringing down neighborhood value. And your clubhouse is sitting on a $7 million 0 cents liability. We all carry our burdens, Cassandra." She turned without another word. Eli watched her go, leaning on the porch post beside me. "You think she's backing off?" "No," I said, eyes still on her retreating form. "She's regrouping, but now she knows I'm not bluffing." We weren't just preserving a cabin anymore. We were pulling threads. And Cassandra's perfectly tailored empire was starting to unravel. The next morning I walked the line. Not in metaphor, literally. The edge of our land, from the north tree line down to the base of the slope where the clubhouse patio sat like an uninvited guest. After Cassandra's little visit, I needed more than old maps and family memories. I needed numbers, pins, proof etched in the soil itself. So I hired Jack Matheson. He rolled up in a rusted-out truck that looked like it had mapped half the state already. Surveyor boots, laser scanner, coffee in a thermos older than me. Jack didn't care about neighborhood drama. He cared about landmarks and boundary markers. The sort of man who'd rather argue with a tree than with a lawyer. "You trying to kick somebody off your grass?" he asked as he set up the tripod. "I'm trying to make sure someone doesn't steal the roots," I said. Jack grunted. "Good answer." He got to work. All afternoon we walked and measured, checked old markers, verified lot lines. He barely spoke except when he found something that didn't fit. Near the bottom slope, right where the clubhouse extended over the hill, he paused beside a moss-covered post buried in the brush. He knelt and brushed the dirt off it, revealing a rusted steel marker barely visible beneath the earth. Etched into it, CWG. "Your mark?" Jack asked. "My grandfather's." He nodded. "They poured concrete 6 feet past this. 12, according to the deed." "Even better," he said, snapping a photo. By the time he was done, we had digital scans, time-stamped photos, drone footage, GPS overlays, and physical measurements. It wasn't just thorough, it was courtroom proof. That night, Eli and I sat on the floor, the cabin lights low, and reviewed everything on his laptop. They really did it, he said. Built part of the clubhouse over our land. Now they're going to pay for every inch. I drafted a short email and attached the survey. No emotion, no commentary, just facts. An hour later, Cassandra responded. Please refrain from escalating what is clearly an internal matter. The HO board is reviewing your claims and will respond through appropriate channels. I smiled. No denial, no apology, just a woman scrambling to keep the walls from cracking. The next day, someone else came knocking. Leonard Pratt stood at my porch, sweating through his collar, carrying a bulging manila folder. He looked like a man who'd just realized he wasn't holding the cards anymore. We'd like to propose a solution, he said quickly. An easement arrangement. A mutually beneficial agreement in writing. Financial compensation to avoid unnecessary legal complications. I didn't open the folder. You ever plant a tree, Leonard? He blinked. No. My grandfather did, I said. Right down there. 40 years ago. Same spot you paved over for a drinks patio. Now you want to pay me to pretend it never happened? It's not personal. I stared at him until the silence did its work. Then I took the folder and dropped it untouched into the recycling bin. Send the next offer to my lawyer. That afternoon, Jack returned to install metal boundary stakes, bright yellow with reflective tape, and I added a sign just big enough to be visible from the clubhouse's windows. Carpenter Lansing, no trespassing, survey verified, documented. It wasn't loud, it wasn't threatening, but it was undeniable. By the end of the week, the eastern patio of the clubhouse stayed empty. No more HOA staff pacing the edge, no more dire drive-bys, windows drawn, silence, heavy as bricks. Judy saw the sign one morning and laughed. You just scared the wolf off the hill. No, I told her, I just reminded them that the hill was never theirs. But I wasn't done. I'd tugged at their wallpaper, now I was going for the studs. Because Cassandra's clubhouse didn't just sit on stolen ground. It was built on borrowed time. I knew they wouldn't leave it at that. Cassandra wasn't the type to admit defeat. Not out loud, not on paper, and certainly not with her kingdom's foundations slipping out from under her heels. No, people like her don't step down. They strike sideways. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The air was sharp and dry. I was on the porch with Eli, patching an old tackle box, when we both heard it. Low, mechanical, and getting louder. Not the usual landscaping gear from down the hill. This was heavier, rhythmic, like someone was dragging metal teeth across gravel. Eli stood up first. Dad, is that a bulldozer? I didn't answer, I just followed the sound. And there it was, rumbling up the HOA's main access road, bright yellow and freshly polished, flanked by a man in a neon vest and another carrying a clipboard like a badge of honor. The machine pulled up right at the edge of our posted boundary. The driver cut the engine and stepped out like he was just there to mow a lawn. Who authorized that, I asked, already pulling my phone from my pocket. And the man in the vest, contractor maybe, walked over, clearly uncomfortable. Sir, we were instructed to begin grade work along the perimeter for an extended amenity zone. We were told the land was clear. Clear? I repeated, pointing to the sign. That says private property. You see the stakes? You're 12 feet over the line. He adjusted his clipboard, avoided my eyes. I don't make the calls. I just follow the site plan. Eli, without saying a word, had already started filming. Landscape mode, wide angle. He got the bulldozer, the sign, the men, the boundary tape, all of it. You're going to want to tell your supervisor to turn that thing around, I said, before this becomes an entirely different kind of case. The man hesitated, walked back to the bulldozer, spoke into his radio. 2 minutes later, the machine hissed to life again. Reversed slowly, then crawled back down the road it came from. Like a dog that finally recognized the wrong porch. They left behind a flattened patch of brush and a series of fresh tire tracks crossing a boundary line they had no right to touch. Did you get all of that? I asked Eli. Every second, he said, even caught the sign in focus. That night, I posted the video. No commentary, no angry captions, just footage. The title? Bulldozer enters private property, caught on tape. By the next morning it had 5,000 views, then 10, then 20. People started emailing me, former residents, current homeowners, even folks from the next town over who'd had their own HOA battles. One message stood out, a woman named Carla from 2 blocks down. She wrote, "They bulldozed my rose garden 5 years ago, called it a fire hazard. I didn't fight back. I wish I had. Thank you for doing this." I printed that message and pinned it above my workbench. At 11 a.m., I received an official notice from the HOA's legal representative stating the incident had been a clerical miscommunication and that no further construction would proceed until territorial clarification was completed. Translation, they got caught and now they were stalling. So I sent my own response. No threats, just an invoice. Unauthorized use of private property for commercial equipment access, $2,000, 0 cents. Itemized, clean, documented. That same day, a letter arrived via courier, thick paper, HOA crest stamped in gold, Cassandra's words, neatly typed. "Mr. Whitmore, we regret the misunderstanding and are prepared to discuss a resolution in person. Please consider meeting with the board for a civil and constructive conversation." A meeting. Not a warning, not a citation, a request. I leaned back in my chair, letter in one hand, Eli's video playing on loop in the other. "Civil and constructive," I said aloud. Eli smirked. "Means they're scared." I nodded. "Means they blinked." They weren't running bulldozers anymore. Now they were sending invitations. But what they didn't realize yet was I wasn't coming to the table empty-handed. I was coming with the receipts. And if you've ever had someone roll in like they own the land beneath your feet, just remember, a clipboard doesn't beat a camera and silence doesn't mean surrender. Drop a comment if you're keeping receipts too. You're not alone. I didn't RSVP to Cassandra's invitation. Didn't need to. The video had already done the talking, and my silence was starting to echo louder than any HOA newsletter could drown out. They'd underestimated how fast truth travels when you stop whispering it. But I wasn't done collecting leverage. The clubhouse was the key, not the people inside it. Those could be replaced, reshuffled, hidden behind legal letters. But the building, that was fixed, permanent, traceable. So I went back to the courthouse. Marla Reyes met me with a raised eyebrow and a knowing smile. "You're back." "I need every permit related to the clubhouse," I said. "Construction, modification, zoning, anything with a signature." She motioned me to follow her into the back archive room where the old paper files lived like sleeping dogs, harmless until someone kicked the right one awake. It took 3 hours, 2 binders, and 1 half-burned box from storage, but we found what I needed. There it was, tucked between boring financial reports and landscaper contracts, a recorded notice of non-compliance dated 17 years ago. It outlined a boundary concern flagged during initial construction, noted but never resolved. Someone had stamped the file, reviewed, and left it unsigned. "Let me guess," I said, "never followed up?" Marla shrugged. Looked like someone wanted the clubhouse more than they wanted a paper trail. I scanned the document, saved copies, and thanked her. On my way out, she stopped me. "I've worked here for 21 years, she said. "You're the first homeowner to actually dig. The rest just grumble and move." "That's the difference," I said. "I'm not moving." Back at the cabin, I laid out everything. Photos, maps, permits, timestamps. On the dining table like a war room, Eli leaned over it all, eyes sharp. "They really did build it illegally," he said. "On paper and on land." We assembled a packet, neatly bound. No drama, no caps lock, just precision. Then I sent it off to the county zoning commission, the tax assessor, and the building compliance office. No threats, no speeches, just information. Within a week, things started shifting. First came the zoning inquiry, a formal letter to the HOA requesting clarification on boundary adherence, construction authority, and usage compliance. I wasn't copied directly, but I saw the ripple. The clubhouse lights stopped staying on late, community yoga was temporarily paused, the monthly wine socials vanished from the bulletin board. Then came the county tax review. Because if a structure is built illegally across multiple properties, tax codes get murky, and accountants hate murky. That's when Cassandra called. This time, her voice cracked just slightly. "We're looking for a path forward, Mr. Whitmore." "You already built a path," I replied, "over someone else's land." She exhaled through her nose. Surely there's a middle ground. There is, I said. It's 12 feet wide, and you're standing on it. She didn't respond. So I made it easier. I emailed a proposal, not a settlement, not a bribe, a clear option. Vacate the overbuilt portion or lease it from me at commercial land rates. And because I'd done the math, I included the figure. $3,600.00 per month. Outrageous, she wrote back. No, I replied, fair. And then I did something unexpected. I didn't press. I didn't threaten legal action. I waited. Because pressure isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a single stone under a foundation, easy to ignore until it shifts everything. Meanwhile, homeowners started noticing things. Questions bubbled up in their forums. Why were events canceled? Why was part of the clubhouse suddenly fenced off? Why was Cassandra so quiet at meetings? And through it all, I kept walking the line. One morning, Eli came out with 2 coffees and handed me one. They're breaking. Good, I said, sipping slow. Now we see who they become when they're cracked open. Because Cassandra and her board built their power on fear, silence, and assumption. And I was tearing all 3 out, one document at a time. The HOA silence was starting to feel like confession. Meetings went shorter, bulletins grew vaguer. Even Leonard stopped driving his golf cart around like a sheriff. The clubhouse east wing, once bustling with HOA events, now sat taped off like it was waiting for demolition or a verdict. But silence wasn't enough. I didn't want whispers, I wanted records. And Marla delivered. She called me late one afternoon, the kind of voice people use when they've been sitting on something too long. Found something, she said, but you didn't get it from me. By the time I arrived at her office, she already had the folder out. It was slim, fragile, probably untouched for over a decade. She slid it across her desk like it burned. Early clubhouse grant applications, she said, from when Cassandra wasn't president yet. Inside were 2 handwritten notes and 1 scanned plat map stamped preliminary, not finalized. But it wasn't the map that caught my eye. It was the 3rd page, a letter signed by the original HOA architect, flagging a foundational irregularity. It referenced a builder's shortcut, an eastern slab poured quickly to avoid weather delays. No soil compaction report, no geological survey, no easement verification. In short, they rushed it. They built half their Pride and Joy clubhouse on unsettled soil without checking if they had the right to do so. And that mistake had sat undisturbed for nearly 20 years, until I knocked on the door they thought they'd buried. This isn't just trespass, I said. It's structural fraud. Marla nodded. And if you were vindictive, you'd leak it. If I were, I agreed. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I filed a formal notice of encroachment using the plat map, the survey, and the foundation report. I made sure it was reviewed by a structural engineer before I submitted it. His opinion? If they hit a wet winter, that patio's going to sink like a folding chair. Then I emailed Cassandra. No threats, just the PDF and a note. The foundation reflects the leadership. Both are cracking. I expected silence. Instead, she showed up. Another day. This time, Cassandra didn't dress like she was selling houses. She wore flat shoes, no pearls, and a windbreaker that made her look almost ordinary. She didn't knock, just stood at the edge of my boundary line like she was asking the ground for permission. You made your point, she said. I didn't move from the porch. That wasn't my point. Then what is? She snapped. What do you want? You want an honest answer? I asked. I want you to realize this isn't about fences and flower beds. It's about power and what people do when they think no one's watching. You used rules like weapons, but you forgot something. She raised an eyebrow. Deeds don't lie. Land remembers. She looked away, not because she was embarrassed, but because she knew she couldn't spin it anymore. Not to me, not to the county, not to the community watching everything unfold. Then what happens now? She asked, quieter. I sipped my coffee. That depends. Do you want to fix what you broke or fight to keep what you stole? Cassandra didn't answer. She just turned and walked back to her SUV. But her footsteps weren't steady this time. They wavered, like the ground under her wasn't quite as solid anymore. Later that evening, Eli found me at the dock. You think she's giving up? No, I said, but she's starting to understand she already lost. He sat beside me, letting his legs dangle over the water. Feels weird, he muttered. What does? That we didn't yell, we didn't scream or throw things, we just outlasted them. I smiled. That's the part they never see coming. Some people fight with fire, others fight with patience, and sometimes the longest burn leaves the deepest mark. Because while Cassandra and her board buried shortcuts in the dirt, I planted anchors. And the truth? It doesn't wash away with the rain. The email came 3 days after our last conversation. Subject line left blank, no formal letterhead, no crest, just a plain message from Cassandra's personal address. Let's talk. No board, just you and me. It was a far cry from the scripted messages and veiled threats that used to come with gold-embossed HOA logos and legal jargon. This one read like a white flag wrapped in hesitation. I didn't respond right away. Letting someone like Cassandra sit in silence is a move all its own. When I finally replied, I offered to meet at the Old Town Diner, neutral ground, no offices, no podiums, no assistants holding clipboards like shields, just ceramic coffee mugs and overhead lights too dim to hide the truth. She was already there when I arrived. Alone, seated by the window, blazer draped over the booth like even she knew it didn't belong this time. No pearls, no notebook, just her and a glass of water, the condensation forming a nervous ring on the table. Thanks for coming, she said, folding her hands. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, I replied. A waitress poured me coffee and left us alone. Cassandra didn't speak right away. Her eyes flicked to the window, toward the hills in the distance. You know, she said finally, when I moved here the board was already a mess, too many voices, too much chaos. I thought if I could clean it up, organize it, the neighborhood would follow. It did, I said, but only in the way concrete follows a crack. She winced. I didn't mean for it to go this far. That bulldozer crossed my line, literally and legally. Cassandra nodded. I'm not here to defend that. I'm here to offer something that might end this before it costs everyone more than it already has. She reached into her purse and slid a folded sheet across the table. A lease agreement, drafted quietly, naming me as the landholder, offering a monthly commercial rent figure, significantly less than what I'd originally calculated, but more than symbolic. I convinced the board this was cheaper than court, she said, cleaner than scandal. We'll pay to occupy the disputed land. You get the recognition you wanted. They get to keep their precious clubhouse. Everyone wins. I took my time reading it. The numbers were tidy, the terms were binding. But that wasn't what caught my attention. At the bottom, there was no HOA letterhead, no attorney signature, just hers. You signed this yourself? I asked. Yes, she said, and I didn't show it to the others yet, not until I knew where you stood. I'm standing where I always was, I said, on my land. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day, but the kind that settles into your bones after years of pretending you were doing the right thing. So, she asked. I folded the paper and set it aside. It's a start, I said, but we do this my way. What does that mean? It means you go public with this. Not me, not the board's lawyers, you. You explain what happened, you acknowledge it. No spin, no blame shifting, just fact. She stiffened. You want me to announce my own failure? I want you to stop pretending it wasn't one. Cassandra was quiet for a long time. The hum of the diner filled the space between us. Somewhere behind the counter, a cook cursed at a dropped spatula. Life moved on, like it always does. Finally, she nodded. I'll draft a statement. I'll review it, I said, and if it reads like a clean apology, not a PR move, I'll sign the lease. Anything else? One more thing, I said, standing up. You step down, officially. She didn't argue. As I left, I glanced back and saw her sitting there, looking not like a villain, but like someone who had finally run out of costumes to wear. Eli was waiting in the truck. How'd it go? He asked. I handed him the lease. We just made them pay rent on their own throne. And if you've ever had to sit across from someone who spent years pretending they owned what was yours, just to watch them finally ask for permission, you know exactly how satisfying that silence can be. Drop a comment if you've ever made someone pay for crossing the line. By the time Cassandra's resignation email hit the HOA inbox, the wheels were already in motion. She stepped down quietly, no town hall speech, no drawn-out farewell, just a carefully worded notice citing personal health and time commitments, classic retreat language. But what she didn't realize was that stepping down didn't stop the reckoning, it just removed the buffer. The board thought losing Cassandra meant the pressure would ease, that once she was gone, I'd stop pressing. Maybe they even hoped I'd fade into the background now that I had my lease. But they still didn't get it. This was never just about me. It was about every homeowner they steamrolled on the way up. So I filed suit, not just a personal claim, a civil action on behalf of myself and every resident whose property rights had been infringed or manipulated under the current HOA regime. With Judy's help, we gathered statements. Dozens. Some handwritten, some typed, some recorded on voice memos from folks too tired to talk but still needing to be heard. Teresa Vaughn was the first to panic. I'd barely hit submit on the filing when she called me. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice already slipping into shrill. "We followed protocols, every enforcement action was documented." "Sure," I said, "but now it's someone else doing the documenting." Leonard wasn't far behind. He showed up at my gate with a half-hearted offer. Waive the suit in exchange for a full HOA apology letter and a year of waived dues. "You really think this is about dues?" I asked. He looked down. "Honestly, we didn't think it would come to this." "That's the problem, Leonard. You never thought anyone would push back." The legal filing was clean, specific. No theatrics, just a list of violations, recorded infractions, documented harassment, and land use manipulation going back 10 years. The county clerk backed it. The zoning office submitted a formal review, and a legal analyst from the local paper picked it up. The headline landed 2 days later. HOA faces lawsuit after years of overreach. Homeowner fights back. By that afternoon, the board went into lockdown. Meetings postponed. Website under maintenance. Public comment forms temporarily disabled. They weren't leading anymore. They were hiding. Judy called me that night, giddy like a teenager. "You should have seen Teresa's face at the post office," she said. "She looked like someone stole her crown." "You're rattled," I said, "but we're not done yet." Because court wasn't just about justice, it was about exposure. Discovery meant everything came out. The internal emails, the staged fines, the coordinated enforcement waves, all the little things they thought no one noticed. And Eli? He turned the whole thing into a documentary project. Interviews, footage, old flyers, even voiceovers. He titled it, "Lines They Crossed." "I thought this was just about saving Grandpa's cabin," he told me one night as he edited clips. "But it's really about people who got tired of being quiet." He was right. 1 week after the article dropped, a new HOA board was hastily elected, half of them unwilling, the other half clueless. Nobody wanted to hold the sword Cassandra left behind. The lawsuit loomed too large. And yet, in the middle of that chaos, I received another letter. This one was different. No threats, no fines, no jargon. Just a handwritten note on plain paper, from a neighbor I didn't even know well. "Thank you for doing what the rest of us were too scared to start. You didn't just win your fight, you gave the rest of us a reason to believe we could fight ours too." I pinned it next to Carla's old email, and for the first time in a long time I sat on the porch and breathed. Not in defense, not in strategy, just in peace. The foundation had cracked, the walls were coming down. Injustice? It wasn't loud, it was steady. The courthouse was quiet the morning of the first hearing, almost too quiet, like it knew this wasn't just about paperwork. It was about all the stories that never made it past the front door. I walked in with a file under my arm and a community standing behind me, even if most of them wouldn't be in the room. Teresa didn't show. Leonard did, but his tie was crooked and his eyes didn't lift once. The new interim board had sent an attorney who looked like he'd just found out what HOA stood for last week. They weren't ready, but I was. The judge reviewed the filings without fanfare. She didn't need theatrics. She had the survey, the permit errors, the testimony, the footage. One by one, every attempt to downplay the situation unraveled. "What we're looking at," she said flatly, "is not just a zoning dispute. It's a pattern of selective enforcement, property overreach, and a misuse of power by individuals in a governing role. I didn't need to speak much, the documents did the heavy lifting. When the footage of the bulldozer played on the overhead screen, you could hear the collective shift in the room. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew that wasn't an accident. That was a threat that didn't land. The judge issued her ruling that same morning. My deed was upheld. The clubhouse's eastern wing, illegally constructed. The county was instructed to reassess its structural permits. The HOA was ordered to pay restitution for trespass, including back lease payments for the duration of their encroachment. And the board, in its entirety, was placed under formal audit, pending review of all past financial actions. That moment wasn't loud, no cheering, no outbursts. Just a quiet, powerful kind of justice, the kind you feel more than hear. Outside the courthouse, Eli waited with a camera slung around his neck. "You win?" he asked. "No," I said. "We corrected the record." News traveled fast. Within 2 days, the community knew. Within a week, the new board, under pressure from the county and their own residents, sent out an official notice. Effective immediately, the Harmony Pines HOA clubhouse will be closed pending structural review and compliance repairs. All operations are suspended. Just like that, the heart of their empire fell silent. I didn't gloat. I didn't send out statements or victory posts. Instead, I walked the edge of my property, past the reflective stakes, the old oak tree, the cabin my grandfather built, and stopped by the tape they had once ignored. Now it was backed by law and fear and precedent. Later that week, I got a knock on the door. It was Carla, the woman who'd written me months ago about her bulldozed rose garden. She brought a small, potted rose bush, red as fire. "For your porch," she said, smiling. "Figured it's time you got to plant something too." I didn't realize how much I needed that. We sat for a while, her sharing more about the day they tore down her fence, how she cried afterward, not because of the fence, but because she'd stayed quiet. "That's the part that eats at you," she said. "Not what they take, what you let go. But that's the thing, you don't have to let it go forever. Sometimes, the land waits for you to speak up." By Friday, the HOA clubhouse was roped off and wrapped in orange tape, with 2 inspectors arguing over concrete stress points and undocumented modifications. The eastern wing looked smaller now, shrinking under scrutiny, stripped of its swagger. The same clubhouse where Cassandra once held HOA elections with wine glasses and smug grins was now a liability on a spreadsheet. It's me. I'd already moved on. Not physically, emotionally. Because the win wasn't the lawsuit. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the apology letter that eventually came, half-hearted and too late. The win was knowing I held the deed. And this time, they had to ask permission. The rope around the clubhouse stayed up for weeks. Most residents passed it without comment. Some paused, looked up at the windows, and then kept walking. Nobody missed the events. Nobody missed the board. People had lived under a weight for so long they'd stopped noticing it. Until it lifted. I didn't gloat. I didn't do victory laps or start petitions. I just kept doing what I'd always done, fixing the cabin, walking the property, sitting under the oak tree my grandfather planted. But I did make one small change. I dragged an old rocking chair, the one he carved by hand, down from the attic. It still creaked like memory itself. I placed it right at the edge of the boundary, facing the clubhouse. Every morning after, I brought my coffee out and sat there. No signs, no messages, just me, watching, letting them feel it. Eli started calling it the throne. "That chair's probably more honest than half the board meetings they ever held," he said. "Because it doesn't pretend to be anything it's not," I replied. On a clear Thursday, I noticed a moving truck parked outside the clubhouse. 2 men hauled out boxes. One marked archives, the other board property. I didn't ask where it was going. It didn't matter. The kingdom was hollowed out now, stripped of the illusion of control. Later that week, the interim board sent out a survey, a real one, not a veiled attempt to collect ammo, but an actual request for feedback. For once, it seemed like the neighborhood was being asked instead of ordered. Judy called me that night. "You did it," she said. "No," I told her. "We all did. I just refused to look away." She chuckled. "Still, not bad for a man with a porch and a paper trail." I looked out at the cabin, the dock, the trees that had stood longer than any committee ever would. "I didn't win," I said. "I just made sure nobody else lost after me." The next month, I met with the new board. Not because I wanted to run for a position. I'd had enough of chairs and titles. But I offered to help create a new policy. One rule: no land can be governed without proof it belongs. They accepted it without debate, maybe because they knew they couldn't argue with someone who held the deed and the scars to match. As spring came in, more neighbors started stopping by. Carla brought another rosebush. A man named Peter from 3 lots over brought an old photo of his father's porch, torn down years ago after a violation letter. We planted both, one on each corner of the boundary. I think it's fitting, Eli said, standing between them. Thorns on one side, roots on the other. The chair stayed. Some mornings I found birds sitting on it. Other days, someone would come by and leave a note on the armrest. Quiet little thanks. I never read them out loud. I didn't need to. The meaning was already built into the grain. Then, one day, I walked out to find a folded envelope taped to the back of the chair. Inside was a copy of the very first violation letter I'd ever received, faded, smudged with time, and across it, written in ink, "You were right to ignore this. No name, no return address. Disclosure." Because in the end, it wasn't about lawsuits or fines or even power. It was about remembering that the ground we stand on doesn't get to be rewritten by people with fake authority and matching polos. It belongs to those who care enough to protect it. And sometimes, the most powerful position in the neighborhood is just one chair placed exactly where it matters. And if you're watching this video while dealing with your own HOA nightmare, remember, the rules mean nothing without proof, and fear only works until someone refuses to blink. Drop a comment below if you've ever faced down bullies with badges, because your silence doesn't have to last forever.